gladly. I'll listen. Okay, good morning for those of you who thought it important to show up. It's 9 o'clock on Monday, March 23rd. This is the beginning of week 9. And if you look at the schedule in D2L, you'll see we're rapidly running out of units. So we're going to finish up the unit on functions today. Next up is a unit on file IO, which, again, I mean, every unit I run across, I can say this is really, really important, and it is. So, you know, I can't say we have optional units in the class that aren't that important. So that's what we'll do starting Wednesday, is start looking at how to do file IO. And then we have a unit on GUI 0, which we've already started to talk about, so we'll talk about in more detail. And then we're going to go back to the file IO and talk about more complicated ways of doing it, particularly how to take a database and let Python have access to read and write the database. So that's perhaps somewhat of an optional topic. Not that I feel I'm imposing on the 1 or 2 people who show up. If you want to show up, you show up. If not, I can't make you. So we will do some more lectures that aren't currently in the schedule. The other opportunity we have after we get done with the modules is any topic or module that you feel I covered too quickly, let's go back and talk about it. Or any concept in Python that you're not comfortable with, let's go back and talk about it. So we're not lacking for time for Zoom sessions. We have scheduled the 4 hours per week. We could do one-on-ones if that would help anybody. Oh, another person. How cool is that? So just speak up. You know, think about, once we run out of our formal lecture topics, what would you like to spend the time doing in terms of additional topics? And I have some ideas, like the database stuff, but that is somewhat outside of the scope of the class, but a very, very interesting topic. And the interesting thing that I don't want you to miss is that Python has built into it a whole database system. Not the biggest and best in the world, but a modest one that we can use easily, and ones that other people have used to do a lot of things. Turns out it's the same database called SQLite that is available in the Android environment. So if you get into Android programming, then you will have the possibility of using a database that you'd be familiar with. Okay, so let's take a look and see where we are. As I said, I've got, well, we can take a look. I think 5 or 6 approved topics. Looks like 5. So these topics have been approved. They're fine topics. Part of what's on for this week is a check-in on the projects. Well, I promise we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So for those of you, I'm willing to bet without looking that the people who are logged in have already submitted and approved final projects. So I can't be talking to you. I'd be talking to the other people. It is unlikely that you're going to pass the class unless you do a final project. Even if you do a poor job on it, you still get more points than not doing it at all. Okay, so while we're here, you can book me. Is a good way of scheduling one-on-one Zoom sessions. I think one student has taken one opportunity at that. So, you know, there is time available there. So 2 things on our calendar for this week. One is project 2, ding, ding, project. Well, actually quiz buzzer 2, ding, ding. So it's a project, it's worth a bunch of points. Don't blow it off. You know, to repeat what I just said, a poor score is better than a 0. And it's not a hard project, I believe, in my opinion. And neither is project 3, in my opinion. So that's on the list. We're going to look at that shortly. Also on the list is the final project check-in number 1. So this doesn't mean your final project is done. This means we need to have a discussion about what have you done so far. We could do that in 2 ways. You could submit material into this as an activity with some documentation about your project, even if it's pencil and paper sketches, the beginning of a program, some narrative describing what you're doing already. In addition to that, I'm perfectly willing, as part of this check-in, to do a one-on-one Zoom if you think that would benefit you. So I would like to talk to you about your final project. I'd like to help you get unstuck if you're stuck, but I need to hear from you to do that. So of course I will comment on your check-in in D2L, but there's also the opportunity of having some one-on-one to talk about it. At this stage, you should know if you're stuck or not. So if you've made some progress, maybe a little slower than you thought, that's okay. If you've made no progress, or you've been stuck on something for a week and not been able to move past it, now's the time to talk about it. So that's what's going on there. As a historical reference point, the past due assignment 6 on the Ag Lab, I received 2 solutions out of 15 students. Good solutions, but only 2. So that's disappointing. And it's now 2 weeks overdue, I believe. So that means if you do submit it, we'll start at an 80 and go down from there. It's disappointing because although it's somewhat of a lengthy assignment, I don't think it's fundamentally a hard assignment. So that's what's happened. Looking back, looking forward to project 2, let's do exactly that. Let's take a look at project 2. Okay. And let's see, let's make this a little bigger. So the original author of ITN160 sat right across the hall from Frank Sciallo, and they had a good time making jokes at each other's expense in a good-natured way. So this became known as the Are You Smarter Than Mr. Sciallo game. So it's basically a buzz-in kind of a game. Played with 3 contestants and a host. So each contestant has their own button and their own LED. So obviously they buzz in with their button and you have a corresponding LED that lights up. But the first one to buzz in gets to answer the questions. So the key here in doing this is whoever buzzes in first has to lock out the other contestants. As a matter of fact, they lock themselves out too, but that's not really relevant. So the big thing here is to think about how are you going to implement lockout? What does lockout mean and how does it get set? Well, it probably has to do with a global variable. And either everybody's locked out or not. So it probably should be a Boolean variable. It should probably start out as false because everybody can play. And whoever buzzes in first should set that global variable to true. So the next person involved in this is the game show host. He has button number 4, and his job is to unlock the panel to start the next line. Next question. So when he does that, he has to unlock the panel, there's the Boolean variable, and turn off all the contestant lights. No point in figuring out which one is on and shutting it off, just turn them all off. I suggest, and it's optional, that you could use the blue LED as an indicator that the panel is locked or unlocked. So you have another visual clue. And I think that's about what the rest of this talks about. There is an extra credit where you get, you have to do everything in the extra credit to get it for 5 points. It's basically to put out a message if somebody tries to answer the question after somebody's already answered it. So they're trying to buzz in after things are locked. And the game show host unlocks a panel that wasn't locked to begin with. So read through that and decide if you want to tackle that. The other thing I missed saying here is this program runs continuously. So the game never ends unless you want to do the extra credit and end the game using the light dark button. Okay, so questions about that? Does the assignment make sense or not?
Makes sense.
Okay, we have one sort of tentative makes sense. So, start with a plan. You've heard me say it before, I'll say it again. Sketch something out on pencil and paper about what the logic looks like. And if you do that and then you start writing, I think you can tackle this in pretty short order. I think it makes a nicer GUI 0 program than simulator program, but that's just my opinion. Okay, so come back Wednesday with questions if you have questions. And it's in your best interest to get this thing done by the due date, which is the end of the day, Sunday. Okay, so we've talked about that. Let's pick up where we were last time. And that was talking about functions. And I can't underestimate the importance of feeling comfortable with functions as a key to success. Most of our assignments from here on out will kind of ask you to do functions, but even if they don't, it's still the way to go. And I'm not going to go back through the 12 reasons that we like functions. It's here someplace in the section if you want to go back and look at those reasons. So what we did last time, I can make it a little smaller again. What we did last time is we started with the first few, and then we jumped to the ones that showed GUI 0 applications, just so you could get a little more comfortable with it. That forced me to skip over some things that are important, and that's what I want to do today. So I want to give each of the topics that we didn't cover a shot. All of these things, including the 2 new ones that I added this morning, are linked up to real code. Obviously, if I give you the code, you can use it, and I can't accuse you of plagiarism because I gave you the code. So I think this is a good place. I just tried this, and it worked just fine. It came up in a window. I must have done something different. Oh, or I could do this in PyCharm. Why don't I do that? So this is number 5. These are function demos. Okay. So every programming language that I know has 2 concepts involved in functions. One is pass by value, and the other is pass by reference. And most people's first reaction to this is maybe if I ignore it, it'll go away. Not the best attitude, because at some point it's going to come and bite you if you don't understand what's going on. So let's look at the main, which of course we expect to see a main. As a matter of fact, let's click on the variable there. So pretty straightforward, right? Set the value of a to 7. Call my function, passing it the value of 7. That's why it's called pass by value, because we are passing the value. And it's very important to note that that pass is a one-way street. It's from here to here. After we execute the function, print in the main function a equals the value of a. Okay, so the first important thing to note here is that I get a color match over here. Don't get a color match up here for the same variable. So what have I just said to you that's wrong? Or why don't I have a color match up here for A? Or do you think I should? Or are you not surprised I don't? Give me some feedback.
Because it's another function, doesn't like look into others unless you specify it does.
Yeah, that's essentially it. The functions defined inside of, no, the variables defined inside of a function are only in scope within the function.
Right.
Or only known within the function. And it doesn't matter that it has the same name. Clearly, PyCharm doesn't think that A up here is the same as A over here. As a matter of fact, if I click it over here, it shows the matches here, but not here. So you have one of two ways of dealing with this. One is deal with it, and the other is just don't make it the same name. It's not the same variable. So maybe you don't even want to bother to make it the same name. And if you're not creative and desperate to make the name unique, you could do this. You could put an underscore after it and create a new variable with a different name. But I don't want to do that right now. So the only thing this function does is it takes the variable, multiplies it by 2, then this is the abbreviation times equals, stores the result in A, and then prints the value of A. So who thinks they know what the value of A is from that will be printed at line 8? Any speculation?
14.
14 sounds good to me. What about line 14?
Seven.
I think that sounds good. So the proposal is that in the function, the value of A is 14. In the main, after executing the function, it's still 7. And that's my entire point. It's a one-way street. This value goes from here to here. It must be received by a variable here, but nothing comes back. So not only could this be a variable, it could be a literal, like 5. No problem with that. There's, in the function, it becomes 10. Here, A, of course, is still 7. It can be an expression, not like that, A times 5. I'm obviously running into some typing problems here. A times 5 is cool. It can evaluate that, and it works just fine. So 35 times 2 is 70. There we go. But not true up here. This cannot be a literal, like 4. That doesn't mean anything. You get an error. It wants a name, nor can it be an expression. So it has to be a variable, and the name can be whatever you want. So if you want to say A underscore, and here say A underscore, and here say A underscore, now you've created a variable with a new name. And that's the cheapest way to do it. And that will bring us back to the beginning of 14 and 7. Okay, so that's the easy story, right? It's relatively easy to sell this story if you accept the fact that we are passing the value of a variable, literal, or expression into what must be a variable in the receiving function. Any questions about that? Okay. So as you can guess, in programming, easy doesn't last for too long. So we're going to move ahead to the next demo. And we're going to do something else. And, you know, it's kind of important in a demo to come up with something sort of relevant. Even if it's silly, it kind of has to make sense. So I'm going to use the function choice out of the random library, and I'll show you how to use it in a minute. So I'm not going to start by looking at my function, my action function that does stuff. I'm going to start with my main function, see what I have. Okay, so here's my original roster. Bill, Phil, Lil, and Will. And I'm going to print that out just so you believe me that I really have a roster. What kind of variable is roster? Silence is
A
deafening.
list?
Good guess. Hover, and it'll tell me it's a list. The visual clue is it's square brackets. Now, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. We're going to remove a player. So since we're going to remove a player, we want roster to be mutable, not a tuple, which is immutable. So that's why I chose a list. Now, I want to have a function that removes a player. Well, what information does it need? Well, it needs to know the roster. And when I come back from that function, I'm going to print out the roster. Well, we just did that over here, and we found out that it didn't matter what I did to my variable up here. It was still the same as it was down here. So is that going to be what happens here or not? Well, let's just run the program, and then we'll go take a further look. Okay, so the original roster is Bill, Phil, Lil, and Will. I found out that I have dismissed Bill, and now my new roster is Phil, Lil, and Will. So now I've just completely contradicted what I said before. Roster has somehow or another been changed. The actual list roster is now missing a person. Well, how did that happen? Why did that happen? And the reason that it happened, it's a different kind of pass. It's a pass by reference. A pass by reference is where we pass something that's not a single value, or the value of a single variable. Roster doesn't have a value, it has contents. It's a data collection. So if I wanted to pass this as a value, what in the world would I pass? It's a list of 4 strings. So what does get passed is the memory address where the list starts. So that's what they're talking about when they say reference. It's a memory reference, which I couldn't care less where it's stored in memory, but that's what's passed. So the only thing that this knows up here is that it's dealing with a list that starts at this memory location. Therefore, when it manipulates the list, which we'll look at in a minute, it's actually manipulating the content of roster. And if you don't like that explanation, just think that if what we pass is a data collection, then it's a two-way street, which is why this can't be, we could try that quickly. We can make this into a tuple. And that gives me a bad feeling because tuples are immutable. And I sure hope that it doesn't run. Tuple object has no attribute remove. So the function knew that it got a tuple. And as soon as it hit remove over here, bells went off saying you can't do that. So that's a pretty good indication of why we might use a list that's mutable versus a tuple that isn't. So this is clearly a list application. Any questions so far? Time for a sip. So what happens here? call a function. How do I know it's a function? I see parentheses. So the name of the function is obviously remove underscore player. This is the single argument being passed. It happens to be a collection, so it's passed by reference. It's received up here, and here I decided to change the name just to make it more obvious as to what's going on. So what used to be called roster is now called team, but it's not a copy of the list, it's a reference to the list. That's why it's a pass by reference, and that's why it's a two-way street. So here's choice that we brought in up here. And if we say choice team, we will hover over choice to see what it says. It chooses a random element from a non-empty sequence. So it's a single element out of team. That's the person who we're going to dismiss. We'll stick it in a variable called dismissed. We'll print it out. And now that we've chosen the person and printed it, we'll actually do team.remove the person we dismissed. So I can hover over remove. I can hover over remove. Go ahead, make me into a liar. For some reason, remove does not have a pop-up associated with it. Weird. Okay, so since team is a list, it does support .remove, and it removes the first occurrence of the element in the parentheses. So if there are multiple elements, you'd only get rid of the first one. And I can't test that because I don't know who's, I could make a list of 8 people with the same 4 names, but not that interesting. So notice here, there's no return. I'm not returning a value. I am simply mutating or manipulating this list by removing an element from it. So that's the difference that you got there. And it's a critical difference, and it's critical to understand when you are passing by value and when you're passing by reference. You can also pass objects outside the scope of this class. Passing objects is also a pass by reference. So any of your data collections and object things can be passed by reference. The strange thing that we don't cover is you can actually pass functions in a parameter list. And that's, I guess, just different. It's not a pass by value, and it's not a pass by reference. So let's say if you wanted to have a function where you optionally were going to use the same function to add, subtract, multiply, or divide, you could pass the add, subtract, multiply, divide function in an argument list to a parameter over here. Interesting thing to try if you want to try that on your own, outside the scope of what we're doing. Okay. Any questions? Modest example of removing somebody from the roster without prejudice. We just pick somebody at random. Okay. All righty. So I believe last time we did not look at this. I think we looked at number 8 last time. So change of topic. Named parameters and passing parameters by position. Okay, well, that sounds pretty ominous, but it really isn't. And if you look at this program, what you'll see is a very, very simple GUI 0 program. It looks like this. But clearly, I did this to make a point. Let's see what that point is. Well, here on line 10, we aren't calling the app function. If we did, then GUI 0 would have disobeyed the rules by naming a function with an uppercase. We are calling app, which happens to be a class that creates objects. And in that class, there is a function called underscore underscore init underscore underscore. The information passed in the parentheses here is provided to that function automagically. And here's the documentation. Here's a short explanation. Here's a longer explanation. You might recognize that these are doc strings, and everything that we need to know about how app works is briefly described in this pop-up. So no, this isn't a call to a function, it's a call to a class, but because it's a class, then we have the opportunity to pass arguments to it, receive them as parameters, and in this case, we chose nothing. Now you can't do this. That won't work. So if you have nothing to tell it, you still need the parentheses. Well, how does APP know what to do? Well, the pop-up here kind of implies what it is going to do for you. It's going to give you a default title of GUI 0, a default width of 500 pixels, and a default height of 500 pixels. Something called the layout set to or auto, background set to none, invisible set to true. Or hover over this and you'll see exactly the same information. So there are default values. And we saw that when we looked at function demo 8, which maybe we'll look at again quickly. So that's number one. Call a function, but give it no information, and it's supposed to figure out what to do. The other possibility is that your function doesn't need any information. It's self-contained. So that would be another case of using empty parentheses. So if I convinced you that APP is a class with an init, underscore underscore is abbreviated dunder. So I would say that this has a dunder init dunder function built into it. And that's everything that you could put in the parentheses, but you don't have to put everything in the parentheses. But in this case, you do have to put in something called a master. And the master is the parent. In this case, the parent is, where am I going to put this widget? Well, I only have one place to put the widget. It's in APP. So that's where I'm going to put it. So we're getting a default text widget put into APP. Obviously, there's no content to it because that's never specified. How does it know that APP is the specification for the master? And the answer is, forget about self over here, which you can study about when you do object-oriented programming in Python. Master is the first thing in the list. So if I don't tell it which parameter is getting set, it matches them up one-to-one in position. In other words, it's passed by position, first to first, second to second. Well, that's fine, but I certainly cannot remember what's in what position here, nor do I want to. I also don't want to specify all of these, maybe just some of them. So now I can combine, well, I can do one of two things. I can do this, where everything is told what the name of the parameter is. And an advantage to that is that you now have an opportunity to tell the person writing this call what these things do. So the master is going to have the value APP. The text is going to have the value what's cooking. The color is going to be red, and the size is going to be 20. So this is another way of calling these things, and it's called named arguments. Well, what's the name? The name is the parameter in the function, which in this case is the initialize function. So here, I'm just going to tell it everything it needs to know about where these things are going. And that has the advantage of They don't have two advantages. One is that they don't have to be in order. And the other is that you can skip the ones you don't want. Usually we do, at least in GUI 0, we do a compromise of the two. Usually, since we know APP comes first, we just say APP, and then we put as many of these in as we want. And notice the order here is different than the order here, and that's okay because they're named. Okie doke. So any questions about the different ways of passing things? Here is pass nothing. Here is pass one thing by position. Here is naming everything. And here is mixing up this being first and the others being named. And if you, well, I think we're going to go look at number 8, even though we looked at it last time, so we can see one more thing about it. The strange styling issue here, and I can't explain it, but this is what PyCharm thinks you should be doing. These named parameters using equal sign, they don't put spaces around the equal sign. So if I do that, I'm going to get a PyCharm warning that said unexpected spaces around keyword parameter equals. So while this space is correct, these spaces are not correct, and it's a PEP8 issue. So a little weird, I think so, but that's the style. All right. So are we good? We ready to move forward? Okay, here we go. This is what we looked at last time. And it's here because we've yet, well, we did last time, but we haven't talked about default parameters today. And that's a parameter where, we want to give it a default value. Let's take a look at it first. So there's some interesting things going on here that, for those of you who didn't see this last time, it's important to know how to do this as a technique of creating GUI 0 forms. We have 4 rows, which we've shown outlined, which you may not like, and it's easy enough to take them away. So in each of the first 3 rows, we have a title, left justified, within the row. And then we have a, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. We have a text box, right justified. So text box, text with nothing in it. So trust me, it's there, but there's no text in it. And a push button to say that it's time to do your thing. So here's our $150 thing on sale today for 15% off. If I hit the button, today only, your price is $127.50. So I'm giving this to you so you see a basic GUI 0 application that's already finished. This is typical of a lot of GUI applications. It's just forms and calculates. But there's more going on here. The other thing that's going on here is that I can leave the discount out. Well, what does that mean? That means it's selling at list, at retail price. And that's fine. It didn't blow up. Nothing bad happened. It didn't blow up. But it knows that if this is empty, calculate it as if 0 had been passed. Can this blow up? Yes. We can put George in here, hit calculate, and this is a really big, important, convenient thing available in GUI 0. It's called a pop-up or an alert. And it takes very, very little coding. And it kept my program from crashing. Nothing bad happened here. Something bad happened here, but that's what you expect from a GUI program. You expect a pop-up. You expect an icon. You expect a title and some text, and you should expect an OK button. It's also worth noting that while this is displayed, the window that I came from is locked out. It's blocked this window until we hit OK. So what are your choices here? Your choices here are info, which is an I, warning, which is, I think, a yellow triangle, error, which is a red X, yes, no, which gives you yes, no buttons down here, and question, which puts a question over here and gives you a text box to type the answer. So you could actually use question pop-ups instead of building a form to accumulate a bunch of values. So I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to get back to here. So I can leave it out, and it's fine. What do you think about this? Good idea or bad idea? Anybody want to vote?
It should be okay.
Oh, okay.
No, wait.
Well,
Well,
it says it's okay, but from a business perspective, I have a problem with it.
right.
Okay, so there's something else that I should have added in here, and that's that the retail price has to be greater than 0. As opposed to a negative discount. Negative discount is a different story. It says we're doing a markup over list. And as I said last time, this is what car dealers have been known to do if a car is in short supply but heavy demand. I can't sell it to you for the list price, but if you want to give me 10% extra, we can make a deal. So this does have a business interpretation. This doesn't. This really should have been trapped. Okay. And notice that our formatting over here looks like dollars and cents, and that's something you should try to retrieve. So let's just spend a few minutes going through this. We did last time, but it's probably worth a review. And then we will go on to the last couple of demos that I have for functions, because I want to show you something we've touched on before, but show it to you a little more carefully. All right, give me a minute for a breather. So this is my only import, typical of a GUI 0 program. I then decided, and you should too, that maybe there's some information that I'd like to put at the top of my program outside of all the other functions. That makes them global variables. And that's all that Python really knows about. We go on and in style describe two things. We define global constants as variables all in caps, which means it is our intent never to change these values. Python doesn't enforce it, but this is a convention. Or we have regular variables in lowercase, which need to be global, but we do intend to change them. In this case, no. So I want to know the standard width and height of probably the whole window. Let me just see. Yes, I'll get to that in a minute. So I want a window that's not 500 by 500, which is the default. It's 400 by 300. You should size your windows appropriate for your content. If you make them too small, you're going to clip things. If you make them too big, they just kind of look dumb. I'm going to ignore this for a while, come back to it later. Oh my, 2 functions, not only 1 function, but 2 functions. And down here is where I start to define my layout. And I probably should have put a comment here. Define GUI layout. So I have my APP widget or class that I'm using to build an object called APP. I'm using it in umpteen places through the form. I'm setting the text size up a little bit to make it clearer. And now I'm building an anonymous box of a certain width and any old height that I want, representing how much space to leave. So this box, the only important thing here is that it's 20 pixels high. And that gives me a little space at the top. The width I don't care about, but I have to specify it. Now I want 4 boxes because that's what my layout looks like. It looks like 4 boxes. And notice the space up on the top. Notice the space on the side. Notice the space on the bottom. So if I have 4 boxes to put stuff in, they need a name because I'm making them to use them as containers. And box 1, 2, 3, 4 is not a bad set of names. Well, they are boxes. They're in APP. The width is going to equal capital width minus 50 to give me a little border. And the height is going to be 60 because that's what looks pretty. So I'm dividing the thing into boxes of an appropriate height for what I'm putting in. Now all I have to do is I have to lay out box number 1. Well, remember the text on the left and the text box on the right. And that's all I need to do to lay it out. This name has to be descriptive, so I know what it is. I prefer to start my GUI widget names with 3 letters representing the type of GUI. So TBX for text box, TXT for text fields, WAF for waffles, and on and on and on and on. So if I can do it for box 1, I can do it for box 2, I can do it for box 3. I'm following the same thing. In box 4, I'm going to put a push button, give it some text, and tie it back to a special function. And the function is called an event handler function. That's what makes GUI programs work. So this is not only an explanation of functions, it's an explanation of GUI event handlers. They are functions. Notice no parentheses. PyCharm is going to suggest you do this, and it's wrong. This says when you execute line 73, execute this function. Well, that's not when you want it executed. You want it executed when you hit the button. This says register the function name calculate as the event handler for the button. If and when the button is ever pushed, there better be a function called calculate available. So now we can go back and do the last thing and look at calculate. And for those of you who haven't been here for a while, may have missed and haven't watched the video, may have missed the trick I've learned in the last couple of weeks, which is if you hold down the control key and go over this, it turns blue. And if you click on it, it will take you back to the function. So no more having to move around to find your function. Hold the control key and click. There's something strange about this function. This function is an inner function. What do I mean by that? I mean it's inside of main. Why is that a good thing? Well, let's find out. We know that this is a widget. Not only that, we know it's a text box widget because it starts with TBX. Notice that it's green, meaning it's being used as opposed to being set. Let's go, and we could do the control. Well, I'll just scroll it in this case. Let's go find out where else this is used. So no. Whoops. Here it's in kind of the reddish shade. It was set over here. How was it set? It was set as a text box widget. The interesting thing is that this name, control click, says, okay, I found it in line 20 and line 62. So let's go back to line 20. It's known in my calculate function because calculate is inside of main. So now we have a clarification on the fact that variables are only known within the functions where they're defined. That's true. But since this function is defined inside of this function, that makes my GUI variables known to this as an inner function. And we have discussed that already, and there's some examples in the earlier things, but it's a point well repeating. If this is not an inner function, I need some other way of telling it what the name of the GUI elements is. So this seems to be the simplest way to do it. So I'm going to pick up the retail thing from the field. I'm going to pick up the discount from its field, from its text box. I'm then going to ask if the discount is not 0. You should recognize that this is the same as saying if discount has some value other than 0. It's a nice shortcut. So as long as discount is not 0, then we're going to call the function down here with 2 arguments. If discount is 0, let's just call it with 1 argument. And let's see if this function is smart enough to figure out what to do. It is. Calculate sales price. I'm giving you the retail price, and I expect you to give me a discount %, but if you don't, initialize it to 0. And that's how you get these 2 lines to work, by providing a default value in here. And that's the whole point of what we're doing. So maybe you want to note that in the doc string, that discount % has a default of 0. Notice that this 0 is not an integer, it's a string. And I'm not sure. Well, this way it's going to be a string. So to make it work out, I made this a string, or we could have used an integer up here and left this an integer over here. Okay, so looking at this function, is this a pass by value or a pass by reference? All right, it's a simple variable. It's not a list, it's not an object, it's not a function. So it's going to be a pass by value, one-way street. Not that we're going to change anything here, but. So now this function has the retail price, the discount %. I made them different than these names. And we can finish this up pretty quickly. And then it's time for a break. So we're going to try to do some stuff. We're going to try to get the floating value of the retail price, the floating value of the discount %, and do some math to say that the discount is the retail price times the %, but we can't do it as a %. We got to do it as a decimal, so we divide by 100. That makes the sale price the float of the retail price minus the discount. Then we're going to access this widget defined down here. We're going to access its value. We're going to change the value to a formatted string. And the formatted string has a literal $sign. Then it has the variable sale price. And then it's being formatted, comma, .2f. Well, we've done .2f before. That means 2 numbers after the decimal. What does the comma mean? Comma means if this is a big ticket item, $23,500 on sale for 25% off. Print commas to separate into group of 3s, making it easier to read than not. If this didn't work out, and it's particular line 40 where this would blow up if this was wrong. If this blows up, come down here, accept it as a value error, and error is what creates the pop-up. So the pretty pop-up with a title, an icon, a line of text, and an OK button took one line of code. Error. Title, discount calculator, text, enter numbers only. So this is the way to go. Don't build your own pop-ups. Look up in the GUI Zero website, the tutorial, how to do that, and life will be fine. Okay, so we have two more of these to do, which we certainly will do after the break. I'm going to pause the recording. All right, we're back on track. For those of you who joined late, I just want to remind you that due this coming Sunday is Project 2. Please review it and ask me any questions. And also a check-in, first check-in for your final project, where at least you have to submit into D2L some notes or some code if you just got started. Or if you wish, in addition to that, schedule a one-on-one Zoom session with me so I can go over any questions that you have, or if you feel you're stuck on something, I'd like to get you unstuck. All right, questions from before the break? Any leftover questions or confusions? Are you all psyched now about pass by value versus pass by reference? Somebody's got to go, so I know that I'm
excited about it.
okay, cool. I just want to make sure that, is the microphone working? All righty. So two more things I want to do here, and they're related to each other. Not only that, they're really related to the assignment 6 Ag Lab. Because in that assignment, which 2 of you submitted and did a fine job, that means 13 didn't. In that assignment, you're asked to check for a bunch of things. Is it the right time? Is it the right temperature? Is it the right humidity? And is it sunny? So the idea of doing multiple checks means we have to decide how we're going to handle it. And this somewhat forced example that I'm going to do here has to do with launching some kind of a rocket. And we have 2 readings. We have a reading, did I say that here someplace? Yeah, a reading that's done before fueling begins. And that reading must be in the range of 10 to 20 inclusive. Then we have to take another reading after fueling is finished, and that has to be between 40 and 50. And if both of those things are true, we're going to launch. If either one is not true, we're not going to launch. So that's the premise. It's a little forced, but it'll do. So up here, I wrote the story of what I'm trying to do. I've also said that I want to get an okay or not good reading, okay or not good message for both readings. So I really need the documentation of how things were after fueling for both readings, not just one. So let's go down to the main and let's see what we find. So reading number 1, and this isn't a GUI program, and I didn't do a lot of user input, didn't do any user input. So I'm going to set a reading 1 of 25. That's outside of the range. Reading 2 of 55, that's outside of the range. And then I'm going to say, if reading 1 is okay, passing the value, reading 1, and reading 2 is okay, pass the value for reading 2. So these are an and connection over here. And if both of these are true, we are cleared for liftoff. And if either is not true, the launch is on hold. So that's the scenario. Let's see what happens. Okay. Well, reading 1 was out of range. And the launch is on hold. Well, that's not what I asked for. I asked to find out, to get documentation on both readings, even if one was good and the other is bad. So what happened? to kind of quote for any of you who were Charlie Brown fans, there was a single frame cartoon he did once that's where Charlie Brown said something to the effect of, "How could this have gone so wrong when I was so sincere?" So, Charlie Brown was a little naive. So this is what's driving the logic. If both are okay, then say okay. If one or the other is bad, say it's bad. Well, what happened? I was sincere, but something happened. And what happened, it's not a bug, it's a feature, which we've mentioned before, called short circuit evaluation, hence the name of the file, short circuit eval. Once this came out to be false, Python said, I'm out of here. If this is false, I don't care what this is. This AND is going to return false. Same thing is true of OR. If it found the first one to be true, it wouldn't have bothered to do the second one. So you need to know that short circuit evaluation happens, and you need to know how it affects your program. And the story, as far as I know, is the same in any language that you're going to run across. So that's not what we wanted. It sort of kind of worked. The launch was put on hold, but it's not what we wanted. So at some point, we get inspired to look at our Python cheat sheet, and we find out that there's another way to play the game, and that's the all function. So the all function requires every element in a list. There's my list. If every element in the list is true, then all returns true. And it does not short circuit. Short circuit is a feature of AND. All does not do that. So we're guaranteed we're going to run both of these. And it's going to return the same true and false for here, but we're not doing a short circuit evaluation. And there you go. Reading 1 is out of range. Reading 2 is out of range. The launch is on hold. So just to show you the other possibilities, reading 1 is just barely in range, but reading 2 is out of range. And 15 and 45. Both are in range. Both readings are okay. We're cleared for liftoff. So I would say this is something that not everybody picks up the first time through or even realizes that there's an issue. So the issue is short circuit evaluation. And if it's not what you want, then all is the answer. Well, what about OR? The answer is another function called any. So ANDs can be replaced with alls, ORs can be replaced by any's. It's all documented on your cheat sheet and easily Googleable, if you need any more information about it. All right, questions, comments, oohs, ahs. Definitely applicable to assignment 6. So let's look at the functions. We haven't looked at the functions yet, but we might as well. We're here. So this function checks reading number 1, which is the reading that's been passed to it, to be within 10 to 20 inclusive. And if it is true, that it's between 10 to 20 inclusively, it prints an encouraging message and it returns true. If not, it prints a discouraging message and returns false. So this way, all of the printing happens within the function. So as long as the function runs, we know whether we've got a good reading or a bad reading. That worked out so well, we're going to write reading 2 is okay, pass to it a reading, and do a check with a different range. So that's fine, and it works, and it uses all, and that's cool. But if we zoom out a little bit and take a look at these two functions, Let's move this up a little bit. Those functions, reading 1 is okay and reading 2 is okay, look awfully similar, don't they? They both accept a reading. They both have a range check. And they both have very similar logic. So when you see this, you should say to yourself, I've done more writing here than I needed to. I think that I can consolidate these two things into one function, and I think I can make it more general. The only thing I have to do really is I need to pass these ranges in. So instead of hard coding 10 and 20, I need something that talks about the lower limit and the upper limit of the test. So that moves us on to the last program in this section. And if you notice down here that this has now gotten more complicated, but it's only one line. And there is only one function. And the function is now called is reading okay. So to do that, we are going to pass to this function more information. Since it's a multi-purpose function, it needs more information. I kind of think it needs to know a test number or a certain type of test. It needs to know a reading, and it needs to know what the low limit and high limit is. Well, where is it going to get that from? I decided to define some global constants up here that define test 1's low limit, high limit, and test 2's low limit, high limit. So don't feel uncomfortable about adding parameters if it means you can write a more general function. It's a good trade-off. And remember that you can call these parameters either by position or by name. Well, what does the function now look like? Instead of having hard-coded numbers here, we just use low limit and high limit, the reading in the middle. We build an F string that says test, what test? Well, whatever you pass to it. That reading is going to equal whatever the reading is. And then we're going to say in range between the low limit and high limit. Or if not, we're going to say exactly the same thing, but we're going to say out of range between the low limit and high limit. So we've now made it general. And this is how we use it. Establish our two readings, definitely hokey. This is not what you want to do for real, but establish the two readings and then use all, because we know that the and is not going to give us all the information we want. And run two things. One is reading okay? Well, is reading okay what? Well, for test number 1, take in reading, pass reading number 1, pass the low limit for test 1 and the low limit and the high limit for test 1. Also pass to the same function, the number 2, reading 2, and the 2 limits. So we're really back to where we were. If we run this, we will see that both readings are okay, and we're cleared for liftoff. And trust me, if we change these numbers, we'll see that. I have some more flexibility here in that the only thing I do with these numbers, and notice these are the literals, 1 and 2, literally 1 and 2 is going into this variable, and it's only used here. So what if I wanted something more descriptive? Can I do that? Sure, I can. So this is the pre-fuel, if I can spell it, pre-fuel reading. And I guess I need a space after it. Yeah, how do we do this? No, it has a space, so I don't need that. And number 2 is going to be post-fuel reading. And now if I run the program, I get something perhaps more informative. So that's a good thing. Although I can't say it's really important here, I really can pass these things by using the name parameter. And that'll come up in my suggestion list. So I can do that, but not exactly like that. And why can't I do that? Let's see. Let's find out. Parameters. Okay. It can't, the error wasn't here. The error is here. And it says that you're giving me a positional argument after a keyword argument. You're not allowed to do that. So if you need to do naming of everything, then they all have to be named, or else you have to do your unnamed ones first and then your named ones after. But this is simple enough that it doesn't really matter. All right, so there we go. We have something that prints both things, uses all, and we've gotten rid of a function. And I would say getting rid of the function is significant. Having one function instead of two is a good thing. It gives me one less thing to debug and one less thing that if things change, I have only one place to change rather than two. So that's kind of recommended. All righty, so that's those are the demos that are out there. All of these are available to you. You can use any concept in any of these in your own work. And that's about all I had to say about functions. So any questions about either these or anything in general having to do with functions, things that are bothering you, questions that are out there? What do you think? Are we ready to move forward? I guess. Okay.
I'm ready.
So I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of demos for file IO. And I don't have them in D2L yet. I have them here, but I will copy most of these over into D2L for Wednesday. I do want to talk a little bit about it before we give up for the day. And I want to, so here we are. Again, if you came in late, we're rapidly approaching the end of the modules. So we are going to talk about Module 9 this week, Module 10 for a week or two afterwards, and then come back and do some more material in Module 9 than is in the class. So let's talk about why there is a module on file IO. The reason should be pretty obvious. Everything we've done now with variables and lists and all of that stuff, all of those values sit in memory or RAM, random access memory. That means that when your program goes away, they really all go away. This is not a matter of out of scope. They just don't exist anymore. And in many cases, that's not good. It's not okay. We want to know, who got the high score in the game. We want to know how many things were sold. We want to know what was the result of all of our fueling tests. And we can't have that information. We want to know what was the balance in our checking account. We can't have all that information go away when the program leaves. And that topic is called data persistence. The RAM-based data in the program is not persistent. It gets reestablished every time the program starts. So we need to achieve persistence. We also need to be able to provide information to our program in an easy and persistent way. Probably the best example of that, which is coming up soon, is the point of sale system. We really don't shouldn't be hard coding into our program hamburger and the price for hamburger. What are we going to do when there's a super deluxe hamburger, which is really the same, quite frankly, but at a higher price? We don't want to go into the code and make changes. We want to go into a data file and make our changes there. So on the input side, we have the same kind of challenge. One other challenge we have is that what was I going to say? Data coming in, data coming out. All right, I'll get back to it. So if the data is simple, I got it. One other challenge, there we go. Sorry about that. One other challenge is that other programs have data either that we need or that they need. And the most obvious example of that is Excel. Our program may need data coming out of an Excel spreadsheet. And people thought about this a long time ago and decided that Excel should be able to produce a text file in a format called CSV, for comma separated values. Anybody ever run across CSV in Excel? No. Okay. So when you say save as or export, one of the choices that you have in Excel, at least, is CSV. It's a text file. I'll show you one next time. It's really straightforward. On the other hand, our program may do some analysis that we want to bring up in Excel. So we can write a CSV file just as well as we can read one. And we'll do that next week. The next possibility is that this data is either too massive or too complex for a simple text file. So we need to come up with some higher performance ways of doing this. And one of those ways is to do our reads and writes from a database. So is anybody who's here taking the database class this semester or past semesters?
I'm currently taking it this semester.
Okay.
Same.
All right, so that class is all about what? MySQL? Is that what they're using?
That is, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so that's all about using MySQL as a place to construct databases and load data, analyze data, report on data. Well, we can get a hold of MySQL pretty simply. I'm not going to do it because it requires a MySQL setup, but once you see how to do it, then you can do it on your own, and it's easily researched. I'm going to choose to show you a database built into Python called SQLite, but it's not really SQLite. It's spelled SQLite. So your choice is SQLite or SQLite, but that's clunky, so people just say SQLite. SQLite has a lot in common with MySQL. Well, yeah, one of the things it has in common are the letters SQL. So for you database guys, what's SQL stand for? Oh, your instructor would not be happy. No? All right.
Something query language.
Yeah, structured query language. And it's been around for a long time. And there's a whole bunch of databases that say they're SQL compliant. And that means with very minor differences, they all understand the same SQL. Well, that's good and all of that, but Python doesn't know diddly about SQL. So we're going to import things that let us write strings in Python, and those strings are legitimate SQL. And then there are functions that will take the string, pass it on to the database, and let the database interpret it as SQL. The problem is that Python doesn't know if it's right or not. So until you execute that command that says take the string and execute as SQL, you don't know if it's good or not. If it's not good, it's fair to expect that the database is going to come back with an exception. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm missing a parameter. You didn't do this, you didn't do that. But we know how to deal with that. We just have to trap the errors in a try except. So it all fits together nicely. When we study SQLite, we're going to study it not from the database class perspective, but from a programming class perspective. So we're going to want a quick and easy way of building a database without having to do it one SQL statement at a time. And then we're going to want to write Python code that makes it easy to access that information, both for input and output. So that's what's coming up in File IO. I don't think that there was, we've never added that into the topics list here, but I will definitely add that into our list of topics and put examples. But we're going to start at the beginning. We're going to start with simple text files. That means that they can be created by Excel, Notepad, anything that does a save as text file, or they can be created by Python. So that's the simple way to start. There's one other aspect to this that we can talk about now, and that's if we take some kind of a data structure, and we know that could be a one-dimensional list, a two-dimensional list, a dictionary where the values are other lists. We can write that data out to a file, and it's a text file. Unfortunately, in the text file, we don't know what the structure is, and we can't recover the structure without starting over again by reading the text and rebuilding the structure. And that's not cool. So Python has a native way and a more universal way of dealing with that. The native way has the wonderful name of pickling. Why? I don't know. So instead of writing out text, if you write out a pickle of a data structure, it's not text, it's binary, and within the file is the structure. So when I load the pickle file, it will rebuild the structure for me, and that's cool. Saves you a lot of work. The more standard way is that Python has ways of reading and writing JSON files. So where has anybody heard of JSON files? JSON.
I have heard of them.
Okay, so the acronym is JavaScript Object Notation. Well, people discovered that this was a very valuable way of expressing structure in a text file. So it's now used way beyond JavaScript, and it's text-based. You can read it that way, but you can also generate it. It's very dictionary-ish. It begins to look a lot like a dictionary, but there are also structures inside of structures. So I don't know. I don't think I have any JSON material handy, but maybe we can do it for those who are interested to see how to do that. So there's a lot of possibilities. You can only get so far with text-based I/O. Eventually, the files get too big, too cumbersome, and too slow. The typical path away from that is to go towards a database. And the fact that the database is built into Python really helps. So that's where we're going to start going on Wednesday. We'll see how we feel by the end of the day Wednesday, if we want to take another class next week on this, or move on to more work in GUI 0. And the work in GUI 0 probably will extend beyond 1 week. And then we will go back to the topic of File IO and start getting fancy. So that's where we're headed. Certainly the material here in D2L is a good place to start with basic reading and writing to and from files. So I never intend for you not to look at the material here. I just don't want to go over it and read to you what you can read from yourselves. So I encourage you to go over these things. Here's your project 2 down here. Coming up very shortly I'm not sure exactly where it is here, we're going to ask you to take your point of sale program and convert it to use file IO. So keep the basic front end the same, but take your menu items and put them into a CSV file. And then all of your orders, write those out into a text file. So if you haven't done that program without file IO, if you haven't done the assignment without file IO, you really need to, because it's coming back at you. All right, I've talked myself out for the day. Let's see, I did turn on the recording. All right, so I'm going to just pause